On the night of February 3rd, 1981, Dale Harmon stood on the bank of the Auglaize River in Paulding County, Ohio, and watched his newest Peterbilt disappear into the dark water below the bridge approach. That's where this story starts. Not with the accident, not with the ice, not with the driver who walked away shaken but unhurt. With Dale Harmon standing on that bank in his good coat, the one he wore when he was making a point about who he was, watching $85,000 worth of his own equipment go under and knowing that every man on his payroll was watching him watch it. Dale Harmon was 44 years old, and he had built Harmon Freight and Recovery into the largest privately owned trucking operation in Paulding County. He had done it the way men like Dale always said they did it: hard work and smart decisions, which was partly true. He had worked hard. But he had also inherited the right piece of land at the right time, borrowed at the right moment, and possessed a particular talent for making sure that everyone within a 20-mile radius knew exactly how well things were going. He drove a new pickup, changed it every 2 years. He wore boots that cost more than most of his drivers made in a week, and he wore them to job sites on purpose, not because he needed to be there, but because he liked being seen there. His yard on Route 111 was the biggest in the county. 3 Peterbilts, 2 late-model Macs, and 2 recovery rigs that he had purchased new from a dealer in Toledo 18 months earlier. Modern hydraulic booms, factory certified, everything new. Everything clean. Across the road from his yard, separated by about 40 feet of gravel and a fence line that had been there since before either of them, was Virgil Cooke's operation. Calling it an operation was generous. Virgil had a single-bay garage, a gravel lot, and a 1953 Holmes 580 wrecker that he had bought used in 1961 for $800 and had been maintaining ever since. The Holmes was dark blue, or had been once. The color had faded to something closer to the sky on an overcast day. The boom was a fabricated steel A-frame, welded heavy at every joint, with a winch drum on the back that carried 450 feet of chain. Not cable, chain. The kind of chain that had been on that drum since Virgil bought the truck and had been replaced once, in 1971, because Virgil believed in maintaining things before they failed rather than after. Virgil Cooke was 63 years old in 1981. He had been running that yard since 1958. He had 2 regular employees, both of whom had worked for him for over a decade, and a customer base that was small and loyal and mostly invisible to anyone who wasn't part of it. Farmers, county road crews, small businesses that had called Virgil once in a bad situation and never called anyone else afterward. He did not advertise. He did not have a sign large enough to read from the road. He did not have new boots. Dale Harmon had told him, in the spring of 1980, to move. Not asked, told. Dale had come across the road one morning, standing in Virgil's lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, and told Virgil that his yard was an eyesore, that it was bad for the image of the area, and that Dale had been in contact with the county about zoning, and there were questions about whether Virgil's operation was up to current code. He had said it the way men say things when they are not actually asking for a response. He had said it standing in Virgil's lot, looking at Virgil's truck, and he had smiled the whole time. Virgil had listened to all of it. Then he had gone back into his garage and gotten back under the truck he had been working on. Dale had stood there for a moment, apparently expecting something more, and then walked back across the road. That had been 10 months ago. Now Dale was standing on the bank of the Auglaize River watching his Peterbilt in the water, and the first call he made was to his own recovery crew. Let me tell you about the next 4 hours, because that's when Dale Harmon learned something about the difference between equipment that looks capable and equipment that is capable, and the lesson cost him more than he expected. His recovery crew arrived in 20 minutes, 2 men in one of the new hydraulic rigs. They assessed the bank, assessed the angle, assessed the water depth, and began setting up. The bank on the north side of the bridge approach was soft. February thaw had loosened the top 18 inches of soil, and the recovery rig, which weighed considerably more than the county's comfort with the bank's load capacity, began to sink slightly at the outrigger pads when they extended them. They tried anyway. They anchored back 60 feet and ran cable to the submerged Peterbilt's frame. The hydraulic pump engaged. The cable went tight. The rig's outriggers settled another inch into the soft ground. The Peterbilt didn't move. They tried a different attachment point. Same result. The cable angle from where they could safely position the rig gave them maybe 25 degrees off the axis they needed. Not enough. The hydraulic system reached its pressure limit, and the relief valve opened, and the pump bypassed, and nothing happened. By 1 in the morning, Dale's own crew told him they needed something bigger or a different approach. Dale called a recovery company out of Lima, 40 miles east. They had a heavier rig, a newer hydraulic unit with a longer reach. The dispatcher said they could be there by 2:30. They arrived at 2:40. The foreman walked the bank with a flashlight. He looked at the soft ground. He looked at where Dale's rig had left outrigger impressions in the thawed soil. He looked at the submerged Peterbilt and the angle from any point of solid ground to the attachment points he would need. He told Dale that his rig would give him a better reach, but the bank conditions were going to limit what he could do. He said he would try. He tried for 90 minutes. His outriggers held better than Dale's, but not perfectly. He got cable to the Peterbilt's rear frame and pulled. The truck moved 18 inches and stopped. The angle was wrong. Pulling from where he could stand was dragging the truck sideways against the riverbank instead of straight out, and the bank was acting as a dam, increasing the resistance with every inch of movement. At 4:15 in the morning, the Lima foreman told Dale he was going to need a rotator rig or a crane, and that either one was going to require waiting for daylight and better ground conditions. Dale stood on the bank in his good coat and looked at his Peterbilt in the water. The Lima foreman was already getting back in his truck. That's when Virgil Cooke's light came on across the road. Now let me tell you about that light, because in a story like this, there's always a moment when the thing that's been sitting there all along makes itself known, and this was that moment. Virgil Cooke had not been called. He did not have a scanner running at 4 in the morning the way some operators did. What he had was a bedroom window that faced Route 111, and what he had seen through that window at some point in the night was the lights. Emergency lights from the 1st Sheriff Unit, headlights from Dale's recovery rig, the Lima Company's truck. The activity at the bridge approached 200 yards from his fence line. He had gotten up and looked. He had understood what he was looking at. He had gone back to bed. But he had not gone back to sleep. He lay there for a while thinking about the river at that particular crossing, thinking about the bank and the thaw and the angle, thinking about what he knew and what the men across the road probably did not know. And at 4:10 in the morning he got up, put on his clothes, and went out to his garage. He started the Holmes 580. The engine turned over on the 3rd pull and settled into its idle, a deep, uneven note that had not changed in the 20 years Virgil had been listening to it. He let it warm up for 10 minutes. He checked the chain on the drum. He pulled on his coat and his boots, and he drove the Holmes across the road and up to the bridge approach and stopped. Dale Harmon turned around when he heard it coming. He looked at the Holmes 580 in the pre-dawn dark. The faded blue paint, the fabricated boom, the chain drum, the truck that he had looked across the road at for years and registered as part of the background, the way you register a fence post or an old outbuilding, something that is there without quite being present. He looked at it for a moment. Then he laughed. It started as something smaller, a sound of disbelief more than mockery, but it built into something fuller as the situation clarified itself in his mind. He was standing here with 2 failed modern recovery rigs and a submerged Peterbilt, and now Virgil Cooke had driven across the road at 4 in the morning with a truck from 1953 and apparently intended to do something with it. "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" Dale said. He was not asking quietly. The Lima foreman had stopped walking toward his truck. The sheriff deputy on scene had turned to look. Dale's own crew were watching from the shoulder. Virgil got out of the Holmes. He was in his work coat, the one he wore every day, not a special occasion coat. He looked at Dale with an expression that contained no particular feeling about the laughter. "Take a look at the situation," Virgil said. "I know the situation. I've been here for 4 hours. My crew couldn't move it. Lima couldn't move it. What's that thing going to do that 2 modern rigs couldn't?" Virgil looked at the river. He looked at the bank. He looked at the angle from the bridge approach to where the Peterbilt sat in the water. "Your rigs couldn't get close enough," Virgil said, "and they were pulling from the wrong direction." Dale shook his head. "The wrong direction? Virgil, that truck weighs 40,000 pounds in the water. Your rig is what, 30 years old? You've got what on that drum chain?" "Chain," Virgil said. Dale looked at his crew. One of them looked at the ground. The Lima foreman had stopped moving entirely and was watching. "You came over here at 4 in the morning with a truck from 1953 and a drum full of chain to pull my 40,000-pound Peterbilt out of the Auglaize River." Virgil looked at him. "You want me to go back home," he said. Dale opened his mouth and closed it. The Lima foreman said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Let him try." Dale looked at the Lima foreman. Then he looked at Virgil. Then he looked at his Peterbilt in the water. "Fine," Dale said. "You go ahead and try." He said it the way a man says something he expects to be proven right about. Let me pause here and tell you what Virgil Cooke understood that neither recovery crew had figured out. The bank on the north side of the bridge approach was soft. That was the problem everyone had correctly identified. Any heavy rig that tried to set up close enough to get a good angle was going to sink its outriggers or its tires into the thawed soil and lose stability before it could apply enough force. What everyone had missed was the south side. The bridge approach on the south side of the Auglaize River was gravel fill, packed and drained, built up on a slight rise that kept it from absorbing the February thaw the way the natural bank on the north did. It was solid ground. It had been solid ground every winter Virgil could remember because he had driven past it twice a day for 23 years. The problem with the south side was the distance. From solid ground on the south bank to the submerged Peterbilt on the north side was nearly 400 feet. No modern recovery rig was going to run cable that distance and maintain enough tension to move 40,000 pounds through river mud. But Virgil had 450 feet of chain on his drum. And chain was not cable. Cable under long-distance tension loses efficiency dramatically. The weight of the cable itself creates sag, and sag means the pull angle changes, and a changed pull angle means wasted force. The longer the cable run, the worse the problem. Chain was heavier than cable, which most operators considered a disadvantage. But heavy chain under tension sags far less than cable of equivalent rating. Over 400 feet, the difference was not theoretical. It was the difference between a pull angle that worked and a pull angle that didn't. There was one other thing. The Peterbilt had gone into the water nose first, angled slightly to the left, which was why pulling from the north bank kept dragging it sideways into the bank wall. The natural exit line, the path of least resistance through the water and the mud, ran not straight north but at about 15 degrees west of north, which happened to align almost exactly with a straight pull from the south bank approach. Virgil had seen this from the road before he ever drove across it. He had not said any of this to Dale. There was no point in saying it before it was demonstrated. And there was, if Virgil was being honest with himself, something clarifying about letting a man laugh before you showed him what you came to do. He drove the Holmes 580 across the bridge to the south approach. Solid ground, just as he knew it would be. He positioned the truck at the edge of the approach, set his rear wheels against a timber barrier that had been there since the county built the crossing in 1962, and engaged the parking brake. Then he got out and began walking chain. 420 feet of it, unreeling from the drum as he walked across the bridge and down the north bank, wadding the last 30 feet through ankle-deep water along a gravel shelf that ran the edge of the river, until he was standing alongside the submerged Peterbilt. He went under the surface by feel, both hands in black river water at 4:30 in the morning in February. He found the front axle housing, the strongest structural point on the front of the truck, and wrapped chain around it twice and hooked it back on itself with a grab hook. Then he walked back. Dale Harmon watched him cross the bridge trailing chain. He watched him feed the chain back onto the drum. He watched him take up the slack until the chain was running from the axle under the water, across the river bottom, up through the shallows, across the bridge deck, and onto the winch drum on the south approach in a long, nearly straight line. The Lima foreman was doing the math in his head, and his expression was changing. Virgil climbed into the cab of the Holmes 580. He checked his mirrors. He let the engine settle into its idle one more time. Then he engaged the power takeoff. The winch drum began to turn. Not fast. The Holmes 580's winch was a mechanical system driven through the truck's transmission by a power takeoff shaft. It turned at the speed the gears allowed and no faster. Slow and deliberate, the chain coming up off the bridge deck link by link as the drum took up the last of the slack. The chain lifted off the road surface. It hung between the truck and the water at about knee height, 400 feet of forged steel links under load, vibrating slightly in the cold air. On the north bank, Dale Harmon stood watching. The Lima foreman stood beside him. Nobody said anything. Elton kept the PTO engaged. The drum kept turning. The engine note dropped as the load came on, the way old gasoline engines drop when they are asked to work. Not a warning sound, a working sound, the sound of a machine that understands what is being asked of it. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happened. Then the water at the north bank moved. Not much, a ripple, the kind of movement that happens when something large shifts position in the mud beneath the surface, the kind of movement that is easy to dismiss if you are not watching for it. Dale was watching for it. The water moved again. Something under the surface had changed position. The mud that had been holding the Peterbilt's front axle had released its grip at one point, just one, and the truck had moved. One of Dale's crew said something. The words weren't clear, but the tone was. The Holmes 580's engine dropped another note. The drum was working hard now, the gears under load, the chain humming at a higher pitch as the tension increased. Not a sound of distress, a sound of effort. And then the nose of the Peterbilt broke the surface. Just the nose, just the front bumper emerging from the black water, shedding mud and river water, rising onto the gravel shelf where Virgil had stood 40 minutes earlier. But it was moving. After 4 hours of nothing, the truck was moving. The Lima foreman exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind that comes out when something you didn't expect happens in front of you. Dale Harmon said nothing. The drum turned, the chain pulled, the Peterbilt came. 10 feet, 20 feet. The cab clearing the waterline, the windshield coming up brown and streaming, the doors shedding water, the whole front end of the truck rising onto the gravel shelf and then onto the bank proper, mud-covered and waterlogged but moving, still moving. 30 feet. The tires found the edge of the bridge approach gravel, and the Peterbilt stopped on solid ground. Virgil disengaged the PTO. The drum stopped, the chain went slack. He sat in the cab for a moment with the engine idling. Then he got out and walked back across the bridge to begin coiling chain. Dale Harmon was standing at the edge of the north bank when Virgil crossed back over. He had not moved from that spot since the Peterbilt's nose broke the surface. His good coat was dark at the shoulders from the mist coming off the river. His boots were muddy from the bank. He watched Virgil begin to coil chain. He watched for a while without speaking. The Lima foreman had walked back to his truck. He stopped before he got in and looked at the Holmes 580 for a long moment. Then he got in and drove away without saying anything to Dale. Dale's crew were standing by their rig. One of them was looking at the ground. The other was watching Virgil work. Dale walked over to where Virgil was coiling. He stood there. Virgil kept coiling. "How much do I owe you?" Dale said finally. Virgil looked up. "What do you charge?" Dale named a figure, the going rate for a nighttime recovery of that complexity from a company his size. Virgil looked at the chain in his hands. He looked at the Holmes 580. He looked at the Peterbilt sitting on the gravel, muddy and waterlogged but out of the river. "Half that," Virgil said. "I wasn't here as long as they were." Dale opened his mouth, closed it. "You were here long enough," Dale said. Virgil picked up the next length of chain. "The South Bank," Dale said. "I didn't think of the South Bank." Virgil didn't answer right away. He coiled another length. "You were looking at the problem from where you were standing," Virgil said. "That's natural. Most people do. I told you to move your yard." Virgil kept coiling. "I know you did." Dale was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong to say that." Virgil looked up at him. He looked at him directly, the way a man looks at another man when he is deciding whether what he's hearing is real. Then he went back to coiling chain. "Yes," Virgil said, "you were." Dale Harmon paid the invoice 3 days later. He paid the full amount, not the half that Virgil had offered. He included a letter with the check. The letter was short. It said that Harmon Freight and Recovery would be referring any jobs it could not handle to Cooke Recovery on Route 111, and that Dale hoped Virgil would consider doing the same in reverse when the situation warranted. Virgil read the letter once. He put it in a drawer in his office. He called Dale's office the next morning and spoke to Dale's secretary and said to tell Mr. Harmon that the arrangement was acceptable. He did not make a larger production of it than that. Word moved through Paulding County the way word always moves in places where people pay attention to what happens on the road. The elevator, the diner, the parts counter, the feed store. The story changed a little with each telling, the way local stories do. By the time it had made 3 full circuits of the county, Virgil Cooke had apparently pulled the Peterbilt out single-handedly in under 10 minutes, while Dale Harmon's entire crew stood watching with their mouths open. The core of it was accurate enough. 2 modern rigs couldn't move it. The old Holmes could. Let me tell you about the years that followed, because this is where the story becomes more than one night on a river. Virgil Cooke did not suddenly become famous. That was not the kind of man he was, and not the kind of operation he ran. But the phone rang differently after February of 1981. Contractors who had always called the larger yards started calling Virgil first when the situation was complicated. County road crews who had heard the story referred jobs to him when the ground conditions were unusual. Dale Harmon's dispatcher called twice in the following year, with jobs that his own rigs had assessed and declined. Virgil took what he could handle and turned down what he couldn't. He did not expand. He did not hire new people. He did not buy new equipment. He maintained what he had. The Holmes 580 got new chain in 1986. The drum did not need replacement. The boom was inspected and reinforced at 2 joints in 1983, work that Virgil did himself over a weekend with a welder he had owned since 1964. The truck ran the way it had always run, which was reliably and without drama, which was all Virgil had ever asked of it. Dale Harmon sent business to Virgil's yard for the next 11 years. He never again said anything about the yard being an eyesore. Virgil Cooke retired in 1994. He was 76 years old and his hearing had gotten bad enough that he didn't trust himself on nighttime jobs, which were the jobs that mattered most. He sat down with his son Thomas, who had been working the yard part-time since 1988, and told him the yard was his. Thomas was 38 years old. He had grown up watching his father work. He had handed chain on jobs when he was young enough that the chain was heavier than he was, and he had driven the Holmes before he could legally drive anything else on a public road, and he knew every gear ratio in the winch and every sound the engine made under load. He kept the yard. He kept the Holmes 580. He repainted it in 1997, the same faded blue, because Thomas believed you maintained things to the standard they were built to, not to a different standard you decided on later. In 2001, 20 years after the night on the Auglaize, Dale Harmon's company ran into serious financial trouble. The trucking industry had changed. Fuel costs, regulatory pressure, 2 bad years in a row. Dale was looking at selling off equipment to meet obligations. He sold one Peterbilt. He sold one of the recovery rigs, one of the new hydraulic units he had been so proud of in 1981. He did not sell the contract with Cooke Recovery on Route 111. When people asked him later why he had kept that particular arrangement through a period when he was cutting everything that wasn't essential, Dale said the same thing every time. "Because that yard has never once told me a job can't be done," he said. "And I learned the hard way that the people who tell you something can't be done are usually the ones who don't know how." Thomas Cooke still runs the yard on Route 111. He has newer equipment for the daily work, a hydraulic unit, a modern light-duty wrecker for the standard calls, the things that make a yard functional in the 21st century. But the Holmes 580 is in the back of the garage under a canvas cover that Thomas pulls off once a month to start the engine. The drum still has chain on it. The chain has been replaced twice since 1981. The drum has not. People who come to the yard sometimes ask about the old blue truck in the back. Thomas tells them it's not for show. It's for the jobs where everything else has already failed. The Auglaize River still runs through Paulding County. The bridge on Route 111 is still there, rebuilt once in 1998. The approach gravel still packed and solid on the south side the way it always was. Virgil Cooke died in 2009 at the age of 91. His funeral was held at the Methodist Church in Paulding, and more people came than anyone expected. Dale Harmon came. He was 72 years old, and his company was smaller than it had been but still running, which was more than could be said for some of the operations that had been larger than his in 1981. He stood at the back of the church, and he did not say much to anyone. But when Thomas came over to shake his hand, Dale held it for a moment longer than a handshake usually lasts. "Your father," Dale said. "He came across that road at 4 in the morning when nobody asked him to. He didn't have to do that." Thomas looked at him. "He knew you needed help," Thomas said. "That was enough for him." Dale nodded. He let go of Thomas's hand and walked back to his truck. He drove past the yard on his way out of town. The Holmes 580 was visible through the open garage door, the canvas pulled back, the engine running the way Thomas ran it once a month. The idle note was the same as it had always been, deep and uneven and completely certain of itself. Dale slowed down as he passed. Then he drove on. Some machines outlast the men who laughed at them. Some yards outlast the men who tried to move them. And some nights on a river at 4 in the morning, when the modern equipment has reached its limit, and the rotator is 3 hours away, and the ground is soft, and the angle is wrong, the answer drives itself across the road without being asked. It was there the whole time. It was always going to be there.